Hello YouTube, Culturedog Sam Hatch back with another James Bond section of my library, and apologies for the delay in finishing this up because I got a little sick over the holidays, but we're back and at it, and I can show you the rest of at least what I have now. There's still plenty of titles I need to pick up and are on my hit list, but in fact one thing I was remiss for not showing you was a hardcover edition of Ian Fleming's The Man with the Golden Gun, a early, I believe, maybe U.S. pressing or printing from the New American Library. Let's see, 1965. No, third printing. And it's funny, I didn't really mention my kind of modus operandi for picking up the James Bond books themselves that Ian Fleming had written, and I never really got into the whole collectability angle of it. I'm not really looking for hardcover editions, collectibles, first printing, or anything. I don't really hold anything precious about that angle. It's just I want to read them as efficiently as possible. So I probably will end up getting some oversized paperback versions, but yeah, no impetus to go grabbing like first editions or hardcovers or any of that fancy stuff. I'll leave those for some other people. And again, not interested in the most of the non-Ian Fleming written ones either. So I'm just a punk like that. Back to the movie reference stuff. This isn't really a reference piece, but it's just a cash-in. Questions Are Forever, James Bond and Philosophy from James B. South and Jacob M. Held. And this is one of those ubiquitous kind of cash-in pieces that you find. There'll be like a Matrix and philosophy and Star Wars and philosophy and all that stuff. So that said, it's actually pretty interesting, and there's some cool thoughts thrown down throughout about the series and the philosophical ramifications of leading a hedonistic James Bond-esque lifestyle. So that was a good one. Into the biography stuff, I picked up a copy of For My Eyes Only. John Glenn, director of 5 James Bond films, a forward from Roger Moore too, and yeah, this is a pretty cool book. It gets into John Glenn's early time, cutting his teeth as a filmmaker, and gets into back in the day when he was working on films, doing second unit shooting, even all the way back on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and he talks about being there for the stunt with the parachute and Spy Who Loved Me, and then it gets into when he started directing the films themselves, starting with For Your Eyes Only and working all the way up to A License to Kill. So yeah, it's a really cool book, and John Glenn's just a fun guy and has a lot of good stories. I also got Roger Moore's biography, My Word is My Bond, a memoir. I still have not read this, but I picked it up, and it is in the library, ready to go. Even though that Roger Moore is not one of my favorites of the Bond actors. I mean, well, not really say he's not a favorite actor, but as Bond, not one of my all-time favorites. He's still a really nice gentleman, it seems, and gives some good interviews. Back to the more kind of reference material, I got The Man with the Golden Touch, book from Sinclair McKay, about the films and their cultural impact. And this is a really nice read. It's kind of similar to another book we'll see later, one of the John Cork books, but a little bit more compact, and you can read it in bed and hold it in your hands and not have it crush your sternum. And there's actually some photos in here which I didn't remember. Yeah, and this gets up to Daniel Craig. Most of these books are from the Craig era. Speaking of which, we got the DK Book of Bond, which I believe was Alistair McDougall did the writing, even though he's not given credit on the front. These are kind of Alistair Dougal, no Mac. These are kind of like not coffee table books because they're so diminutive, but they're kind of like filler pieces. So I wasn't really that excited about picking all of them up. It was just kind of like a chore as a Bond fan. I'm like, some more books. I mean, they're pretty nice, and I like the layouts and the photos and everything like that. But yeah, as a fan, I'm like, I just feel obligated to go pick them up. And of course, they released 4 of them, and like $15 a pop. So nicely bound though. I like the texture. So I also picked up the Bond Cars and Vehicles companion book from DK, and another Alistair Dougal. But I never got the other ones. I think I got these pretty cheap when Borders Books and Music was closing, and I just assumed that they would always be cheap and kind of took them for granted that they were affordable. And now I see them going for like $18 or something. So I need to get Bond Villains and the Bond Girls one. But again, yeah, nice layouts, big pictures, that sort of thing. Speaking of pictures, where did I leave? I've got a tiny version of Bond on Set Casino Royale, but I think it's in the other room. But I've got that with a DVD set. It came free. But I was mad at myself for not picking up the big oversized Greg Williams Bond on Set Casino Royale book. And now it goes for tons of money. Well, not tons, but quite a bit. And I need to get a copy still, even though I've got the tiny version, which is pretty much the same thing. So I learned my lesson and went and picked this up right when Quantum of Solace came out. And yeah, it's a nice book. Greg Williams has a lot of great photos. Yeah, I haven't looked at this in a while. Some really striking imagery. And like an idiot, I forgot the lesson that I had learned and didn't pick up Bond on Set, the Skyfall book. And now that's going for a decent amount. But no relation, well, except for it's James Bond related. No photos. This is the music of James Bond from John Burlingame. And man, I am a huge fan of particularly John Barry's work and the music of James Bond. And there aren't enough books out there about either the scores or the songs, the source music. There's just so much stuff going on, that inspired other generations of spy movies and action movies, etc. And this book is great. Comes at it from a real kind of scholarly angle, and not only gets into the scores and the composers, but all the songs and even the songs that didn't happen. And great stuff. And I was just rereading I think it was the Sunday Mail lawsuit of John Barry and Monty Norman, when Monty Norman was suing the newspaper for ruining his career and life, essentially, because it was suggested that John Barry was the prime composer of the James Bond theme. And pretty fascinating legal followings from then on. I also got, for the 50th anniversary, to tie in with Skyfall in 2012, the 50 Years of James Bond Life book. And this is cool because it's got a little bit more material related to Time Life magazines. And it doesn't go as far as giving you direct reprints of the original stories, but I like that it kind of points out that these magazines were there as this all happened, and there's a little bit of historical weight to that. So it's cool. A nice book, a lot of good photos, as expected. And of course breaks things down film by film for the most part. But got this wicked cheap and was worth every penny. Also got more Roger Moore action, the Bond on Bond book, where he cashes in on the 50th anniversary of the series with another nice book getting into the whole series, and of course a little bit of Fleming tribute in the beginning there. And he drops a lot of Roger Moore-esque, quips and witticisms along the way. You could tell he had a blast putting this together. So yeah, that's a nice one. And one of my favorites from the 2012 Bond dump, I mean, it sounds nice to say that, is All About Bond. This great book with the photographs of Terry O'Neill. And it's funny, I'm not a major Diamonds Are Forever fan, but that image is super striking on the cover there. I also like that it has a silk bookmark here. Any book that has a silk bookmark gets a couple extra points in my book. Get it? And there are a lot of different essays written by contemporaries of Ian Fleming and friends of Sean Connery, etc. So it's pretty interesting. And of course, lots of photos. Working all the way up to newer stuff. There's some Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig in here as well. There is a strange accent on Diamonds Are Forever in particular. It just seemed to have a lot of photos from that. Some interesting bits with George Lazenby and Joel St. John. There's like a potential what-if alternate universe where George would have been in Diamonds Are Forever. But yeah. Great book, and some interesting anecdotes along the way, too. I think I had mentioned this one in a previous video, but it is John Cork and Colin Stutz's James Bond Encyclopedia. And it's another DK book. They seem to be great at milking James Bond fans. Again, this isn't my favorite encyclopedia. Stephen J. Rubin's will always be the kind of milestone for that, mostly because this is broken up into different categories. And it's really not going to be a prime reference for you. It's broken up into villains and actors and actresses and all that stuff. Whereas Stephen J. Rubin's encyclopedia is an A through Z, and it crosses all boundaries and categorization. So this is destined to be a coffee table curiosity or something you kind of pick at a little by little. It's not as comprehensive or as user-friendly as a real encyclopedia, but it's still a nice book. It's really just like another James Bond movie reference book masquerading as an encyclopedia. But it's heavy and well made for sure. I am also regretting not picking up the 50 Years of James Bond Movie Posters book that DK put out in a hardcover within a slipcase. But they just reissued it in paperback, and I haven't picked it up because I'm still gunning for the original pressing or printing. But I did pick up the official 007 Collection James Bond Movie Posters book from Tony Normand. And this is, another beautiful release. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of double dipping between the two when I do eventually get the 50 Years book, but this is great. I love all the international posters, and there's so much amazing artwork to be found within. If I had more walls, I'd definitely try and hunt some of these suckers down. I've already got a few James Bond posters and a little bit too many compared to my wall space. But very nice book. And getting into the bigger ones, this is another John Cork co-written book, also done with Miriam Dabo, Bond Girls Are Forever, which is a nice little counterpart to her documentary of the same name that could be found on some of the DVDs and Blu-rays, and actually was released separately as a DVD at, I think I got mine at Best Buy when Die Another Day came out on DVD. But it's a good piece tearing through the feminine influence on the series and the ladies that make James Bond a little bit more interesting to watch. It's not quite as cheesecake as the other, as Graham Rye's Bond Girls book that I showed in the last video. But it's huge and a lot of great still photos. And to close up this video with another monster, John Cork and Bruce Cavalli's James Bond: The Legacy. And this is a really in-depth book, and it's kind of like a literary edition of all the material that's pretty much covered across the documentaries on the DVDs and Blu-rays. And the only problem is it's a little too huge to kind of cuddle up with in bed. And it takes a lot out of you trying to lift it. But it really gets into the nitty-gritty of the making of the films and the impact on the films and the creation of the spy mania craze in the 60s. Well, there you go, spy mania. And so much dense information. It takes a long time to tear through this sucker. Yeah, if I was to pinpoint one, James Bond reference book is the one to read to really get the whole story, I'd recommend this guy. So, let's take a break and come back with maybe some Spectre-related stuff. Cheers, everybody.